Welcome to the Leadership Roundtable, a podcast with Dr. Conway Edwards, where we talk about the future church. We talk about leadership in the church, and we talk about how we can all lead more efficiently and make an impact in the world that's ahead of us. Today, we have a special guest we're excited to have here, Pastor Dharius Daniels from Change Church, and we are thrilled to have you. Just want to see how you're doing. Welcome to Texas, man.
It's great. I'm glad to be here. It's hot, but it's not hot.
It's not hot.
No. It's like, it can get hot.
This is mild Texas right now.
Yeah, I'm loving it. Great being with you guys.
So what part of the country are you in? Where is your church located all around?
So we have sites in New Jersey, primarily Central Jersey, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you've got Northern, which is closer to New York. So we're in Central Jersey. Ewing is kind of our main campus. That's Trenton, Princeton area. Okay. And then we have a campus in West Hampton, which is headed toward the Philadelphia area of PA. And at the beginning of this year, we launched a campus in Orlando, Florida. Oh, wow. And we have a micro site, an extension site in Los Angeles that we launched sometime last year. So it's really great. It's adventurous. It's highly experimental.
Did you just say New Jersey, Florida, California?
Yeah, highly experimental.
Tell me about that.
Highly experimental. Well, several years ago when I planted my church, my inspiration to plant a church came from my experience with this professor at seminary named Daryl Guter. So this is a long time ago. So this was like early 2000s when he's actually the guy that coined the phrase missional church. Wow. And so I took my first, I think it was systematic theology. It was team taught by him and a guy named Bruce McCormick. And after that systematic theology class, whatever Dr. Guter taught, I jumped in it. Mm-hmm. And long story short, it just really shifted my view of the church. My ecclesiology became more liquid and more fluid and more experimental and more contextual. And so when we planted our church, we always planted with a very fluid view of what it means to be the church. And we just kind of gave ourselves permission to experiment with different ways to be the church based on the context that we found ourselves in. Wow. And so that's kind of what we're doing. And if it doesn't work, we'll just stop and do something else.
Right.
Yes.
We don't have to get caught up.
Yeah.
Now, are there specific reasons you chose Orlando or California?
Well, I don't want to over spiritualize it, but yeah, we do. We feel like we kind of feel like one of the calls of our church is to carve out hard ground. Meaning that areas that are not necessarily saturated with Christianity in culture, where there isn't a great Christian presence. I feel like that's kind of the nature of my calling and somewhat the nature of the calling of the churches that we plant. Okay. And so the Los Angeles thing came first, and we just felt like part of what it means to be missional is to see what God is already doing and then join him there. And so the Los Angeles thing just it was organic. We didn't start it. There was just these watch parties that started taking place with people who were connecting with each other through our stream. Gotcha. And we saw that something unique was happening there, that God was doing something. And we didn't quite have the person to lead it, and we didn't feel the nudge to make it a full-out campus. Yet at the same time, we felt like it could be more than what it was. So we experimented with this idea of a microsite, extension site, because God was already doing something there. Right. And not too long after that, we started sensing that we were supposed to put another church somewhere. And for me, I personally kind of went through this period of 2 years of discerning with my pastor, with my executive coach, something that I was feeling, because I was feeling transition. So I started praying through, what did that mean for me? Was my time as a senior pastor up? Was I going to join a team somewhere and focus on my teaching ministry, et cetera? But long story short, just through a series of kind of supernatural events, we kind of landed on Orlando, which is in the South, but it is not Bible Belt by any stretch of the imagination. Right. And so we're having an incredibly joyous yet difficult time carving out a work, competing with Disney and palm trees and weather and Florida.
So what? So what does it look like to compete with that? To compete with Florida, compete with beaches, Disney. What's the culture like there? How have you had to change, shift, rearrange your how you do ministry and how you are how you reach out to the culture?
Well, I think the best way I can compare it to is I can compare it to New Jersey, which the culture there is not highly relational.
Okay.
It's East Coast, right? So I'm not going to say rude, because if you come from the South, you say, yo, y'all are rude. Right. But it's not necessarily rude. The culture is just not a highly relational culture. It's very fast paced. New Jersey is one of the most densely populated states in the country. It's right on the edge of New York and New Jersey. So you got a lot of commuting taking place. And so the point that I'm making is it's just not highly relational at all. And it's a very kind of corporate culture. Okay. So you kind of have to fight against creating a transactional culture or allowing a transactional culture in church, because it's just kind of the culture of the area. It's like, hey, I don't really expect that much from you. I come to church, I do my thing. You give me what I need, I give you what you need. Right. I might volunteer every now and then I gotta go. That's kind of the Jersey culture. And people really associate, there's like an aspect of their identity that's tied to the area. It's like, I'm Jersey, I'm a Jersey boy, or I'm a New Yorker, or I'm Philly. Yeah. Like one Sunday I was speaking, right? And I made mention to this lady who was sitting on the front row, and I was like, yeah, Brooklyn, right? And she was like, straight up, she mean mugged me. She was like, no, Bronx. I was like, oh, I'm sorry.
My bad.
She's like, yo, this is different. And so the point that I'm making is, man, Orlando, a lot of the people there, they aren't indigenous. So it's this weird, it doesn't have this identity. It doesn't even feel like the rest of Florida. Gotcha. Like I tell people all the time, Orlando and Miami is not Florida. If you think you're going to go to other parts of Florida and get what you get in Orlando and Miami, you're going to be disappointed. It's so eclectic. You got people from all over the place. And so it's really difficult to get a read on it. And people there are not from there. So relationships become huge.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, because you can't compete with, I don't care how dope your lights are, you can't compete with Disney's lights. Yeah. You just can't. And how nice your people are, you can't compete with Disney culture. So it's really, we have to be really intentional about figuring out every culture in a geographical region is rich and poor somewhere. And the gospel makes you rich where you're poor. And so we have to identify that poverty. And that poverty in New Jersey is different than the poverty in Orlando. And so that's kind of...
Man, you're talking to pastors and leaders right now about where they're at, and even churches now, there's communities and cultures shifting around where churches are, and different people are here, different people are there, and there's pastors who are wrestling with, how do I reach? They're finding themselves in a different area. Maybe they want to plant. Maybe they want to go multi-site. Yeah. And I'm hearing you say the way you do church in one place isn't going to work in another place.
Unless you're reaching the same demographic.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
You're in this, yep.
Yeah. So
totally.
if you've got the same type of socioeconomic status in the seats where you are, same kind of age range in the seats where you are, then those models can be replicated a little more. But when you have, like in a church like this, where you've got generational diversity and socioeconomic diversity and ethnic diversity, it's a little bit more difficult to just grab a model from the latest conference and just plop it into the church and expect for it to work.
Is there anything you think that transcends? I heard you say relationships. Are there certain things that, if we get this, we're gonna be good?
Yeah, we've identified 4 things.
Okay.
So again, the greatest form of poverty in the world is spiritual poverty. And when there's spiritual poverty, there's going to be absence of 4 things. It's going to be absence of passion. So at some point, the kind of life that Jesus describes, a life overflowing with zeal, joy, and fulfillment, that's going to be absent. So like in the Northeast, there's drivenness, but not passion.
Gotcha.
Make sense? So poverty of passion, where people are living without being alive. I believe that transcends everywhere. Yeah. Poverty of principles. In some places, it's going to be a poverty of principles. And when principles become clear, decisions become easier. There are no ethical guidelines that predetermine the decisions that you make. And that's kind of what the scriptures give us, right? They give us the gift of clarity on what decisions we should and shouldn't make before we have to make them. Right. Like if you're single, it becomes easier to make a dating decision when you stand under the principle, I won't be unequally yoked.
Right.
And so when you don't have principles, you got to live life by experimentation. And you got to roll the dice. And the difference with rolling the dice with life as opposed to rolling the dice with money, when you roll the dice with money, if you lose it, you can get it back.
Right.
With life, you can't get time back. And and then there's poverty of power, where basically the only help that a person, when you have poverty of power, the only help you have is human help. And there are some seasons you're going to walk through and situations you're going to deal with. Well, the help you will need will be more than human help.
Wow.
And the last one is poverty of purpose, where you wake up every day, no matter how much money you got in the bank and how much you've achieved vocationally, and you don't know why you're on this earth. And you don't find fulfillment until you find purpose. And so we believe those four things transcend culture, they transcend class,
Right.
they transcend region, and those are going to be the four areas that we kind of lean into as a church.
Wow, that's big. That's big. So there is a topic when you talk about church and reaching generations, reaching cultures. There's something going on in our world today. This concept you've been talking about and wrestling with called "I Quit Church."
Yeah.
And I want to know a little bit about what is this all about? What's going on in today's world where so many people are saying, I quit church?
Yeah. So, that's that. It's a reality, I think, that we got to acknowledge, especially here in churches in America. Mm-hmm. All the data is showing us that. Yeah. Denominations are declining. There's increases in denominational churches closing their doors, increases in the amount of pastors who are actually walking away from ministry. Those statistics are alarming, and those numbers are increasing with the younger generations who feel like I kind of got more options. Right. Like somebody hits and say, "Yo, I'm not going to do this the rest of my life." So the data is pointing that way. But this is what I believe: all church quitters aren't created equal. There are two groups. Okay. So there's one group that have quit church for several different reasons. I call them group one. Group one, I believe, is a group of people who've inappropriately justified their quitting. So there are several characteristics of people in this group. Here are a few of them. One is people in group one have spiritualized their selfishness, meaning they've confused their preferences with God's plan. So because church isn't what they thought it should be, they assume church isn't what God wants it to be. Mm-hmm. And so actually they're putting their preferences over God's plan. So they spiritualize their selfishness. Mm-hmm. And when you spiritualize your selfishness, you make yourself a victim when you aren't, because you feel like you feel entitled to things being your way. And so when things aren't your way, then all of a sudden you've been wronged. Right. And no, you just spiritualize your selfishness. That's so you've got that's one characteristic of the group. Another characteristic of the group is they've recreated their own version of Christianity with a God who doesn't require community, commitment, or priority.
Now, who is that God?
Right. Yeah, it's idolatry, because instead of God making us, we make him. Right. And so it's people who don't want to align their life with some scriptural standards. It's people who want a God that does not require that they put him first. Mm-hmm. It's people who want a Christianity that's privatized and that does not require community and doesn't require commitment. Right. Yeah. So I don't want to overtalk it, but those are just, you got people who kind of fall into that category. And I believe when it comes to people in that category, our response to them should be intercession, where we're praying for God's intervention. We're praying for a prodigal son moment with them, right? Because you can't reach them with logic. Mm-hmm. And so if we have to create a God that aligns with, if we have to create a God that aligns with the God in your head and not the God of the Bible, then Christianity isn't for you then. Right. You have the right. God allows you to reject it, and we have to allow you to make that decision too. Does that make sense? Yeah. So that's group one. We aren't talking about that group. There is group two, though. Right. And for group two, they've quit church not because they don't believe in God or in church, but church has become a trigger for their trauma. Okay. Wow. It is. It has become a trigger for the trauma. I think, and for these people have been victims of a church with a flawed ecclesiology that confuses the church with God. The church is the body of Christ, but it isn't Christ.
Right.
It's God's family, but it isn't God. So God always gets it right. We don't. God never has to apologize. We do. God never misspeaks. We do.
Quite frequently.
Yeah. God never misinterprets himself.
Right.
We do. God never mismanages us. We mismanage people. God is not imperfect. We are. And when you're in community, other people become victims of your imperfection.
Right.
And so it's one thing to be imperfect, though. It's another thing to kind of be dysfunctional. So the point that I'm making is that in Matthew 21, Jesus goes into the temple, turns over tables, etc. But he says something that's, I think, super important. It's written that my Father's house should be a house of prayer. You made it into a den of thieves. This is what's scary. He has to tell them that they've created something that's inconsistent with God's intention. They don't even know it. They have in church enjoying it, and it's wrong. And bad religion isn't neutral. It hurts people.
Wow.
Yeah, it either helps people or hurts people.
Yeah.
And so, man, so some people have been, without a doubt, they've been victims. Jesus turned over he turned over those tables. He ran out the money changers because they were exploiting. And church can be exploited. There are two types of exploitation, intentional and unintentional.
Right.
You can use people and not try to, but you're still using them. You're still exploiting them. There's a word, it's called spiritual opportunism. And that is kind of what can happen in some church settings. And people, just quite frankly, are not always walking away from church. They're walking away from abuse. They're walking away from exploitation. Some of them are walking away from molestation. Some are walking away from harassment. Right. Many of them are walking away from irrelevance. And although we cannot, as church leaders, condone it, we do need to understand it so we can correct it.
Yeah. How do we hit the pause button and evaluate, as we're talking to church leaders right now, how do we evaluate, am I a part of the problem?
Well, I'm going to tell you, yeah, the answer is yes. Right? So
maybe it's the awareness that I'm a part of the problem, because
yeah, so like, am I? Yes. Yeah.
Yes and yes.
Yeah. Well, I think whether intentional or unintentional, my point is others are impacted by our imperfections, right? So if someone has a bad emotional day and you mishandle a volunteer, I mean, you didn't try to harm them. That's not intentional.
Right.
But they were harmed. Wow. And so I think it's important to kind of start from there. And really what I'm attempting to do is use this series not as a flashlight to try to shine light on everything that's wrong. Because I feel like churches they're different. So we talk about the universal church. There are different tribes. Right. And depending on the tribe you kind of come up in, that's going to be your experience. Like I had one of our members, a younger lady, she said, I came to this church in my teenage years. So this is kind of the only thing I know. So she's like, some of the things you are talking about, I can't relate to. And so I think it's important to acknowledge that, right? That a church leader might be listening to this and you're part of a tribe where some of the things that I listed aren't necessarily things that were present. It doesn't mean that there's still going to be some imperfection. Gotcha. But some of those things I listed may not be present in your tribe. This series, though, is for leaders who I think when you hear some of the things that I'm talking about, your sensors go up and you begin to see things that need to be adjusted, corrected, altered, so that we can get to the place where we can really say, if we don't want people, or if we want people to quitting church, we need to stop doing the things that make them quit.
That's to the point. Stop doing those things. What are I heard you say another word a second ago, entitled. And the younger generation now gets tagged with the word entitlement, an entitlement generation right now. How does how does church, how does Christianity, how does Christ followers reach out and make an impact to those who do feel entitled or are trying to create a God that fits the box they want him to be in?
Yeah, I think one of the things that the greatest gift that one of the greatest gifts that the church is able to give the culture is truth. Mm-hmm. So when I talk about quitting church, some people will take that, or when I'm talking about making adjustments, doing self-assessments, they'll take that and think I mean be accommodating, like be accommodating to those that are entitled.
Right.
When what I'm saying is, I think what Jesus does is he models for us the way to do church, no matter what cultural context you find yourself in. So if we take his virtues, his values, his vantage point, and we contextualize that, no matter where we are, I think in a situation like where you're dealing with people that are entitled, you're able to take the gospel, and because the gospel is the answer, isn't it? Like if the gospel is really rightly taught and rightly preached, then people are able to see that we are benefiting from a relationship with God we don't deserve. And that one of the reasons that God requires gratitude and praise is not because he has low self-esteem. Right. It's not because he needs it, we need it. Because gratitude is the antidote for entitlement.
Right.
And I think one of the things that is important with this generation is that there was a generation you could just say what.
Right.
This is a generation you got to say why. And I think that's what Jesus had to do. That's why he told so many parables, to kind of get people to see. Right. So I think wherever we see a generational or a geographical stronghold, we have to be able not to just speak truth in love about what the Bible says about this, but why the Bible says it. Hey, this might be a blind spot. Entitlement. This is what entitlement is. And if it is unaddressed, this is what it can do in your life, in your relationships with others, and in your relationship with God. And this is the antidote. Right. This is the answer the scriptures provide to us in dealing with it.
Wow, that's good. So we're talking about entitlement and gratitude being the antidote for that, and a generation in today's world that's so much different. I think every generation changes. Yes. The pendulum shifts from one direction to the next. And I think as church leaders, we have the charge and the opportunity to try to look around the corner to see what's coming down the road, so that everybody says this now, so that we don't end up Blockbuster, so that we can be more like Netflix. How do we get ahead of what's coming? And what are some of the challenges you see with the generations coming up now? What are some of the challenges we're going to have being missional, being on mission, being the church in the future?
I think it starts with, and this is just a conviction of mine. It's not the answer, but it is a answer. The perspective, it is just a perspective. And that is, I really think we've got to be liquid in our ecclesiology. Like, we really have to be fluid in, okay, this is what it means to be the church. So that doesn't change. But in terms of the way church expresses itself, right, you don't see anything in Scripture that lays that out. Because the assumption is that that's going to have to be contextualized based on the places that you're in geographically and the era that you live in historically. Right. So I believe it's got to start there. I think a lot of times churches like Blockbuster, they confuse their way with their what. Right. And that was Blockbuster's issue, right? It was, you're confusing your way with your what. You're stuck in this store experience. Right. You come in here, be kind, rewind,
I forgot about that.
Yeah. No, man, your what is delivering this type of content to your customer. And so I think it starts there, and what leaders do is leaders contextualize. Leaders do more than read a text. They read culture, and they figure out ways to do church to make sure that our way doesn't get in the way of our what. And in terms of, the future, 5 years from now, whatever, I'm an optimist. Yeah. I feel like, especially in America, I feel like church leaders are really in a panic because now we actually have to evangelize.
Right.
It's like, yeah, you actually have to reach people now. We actually have to go out and compel people to come, as Jesus said. We have to be able, as Peter says, to give an answer to every man regarding the hope that's
They're
in
not
us.
just coming looking for us.
Yeah, they're not going to just wake up tomorrow and say, I think I'm going to go to church today.
Right.
No. And so the Bible was written during a time where culture was much more hostile to our faith than we live in now. And I'm really optimistic about the future. I think part of this decline part of it I think is good. I think it's a corrective. I think it is God's way and his providence of correcting the church in some areas that we need to be corrected. And as we align ourselves with God's original intent, I think we'll see fruitfulness.
Now, what do you think? So I'm reading about Mark Cuban's talking about artificial intelligence is going to be the next big thing in business. I'm seeing virtual reality pop up all over the place.
Yeah.
I'm seeing holograms. When you see these things and hear these things, how do you think that those may or may not impact the church?
I think there will be some impact to some degree. Yeah. And I've actually been in rooms where there have been conversations about this among religious leaders.
Right.
And I heard one presenter say something one time that stuck out to me, and I've never forgotten it. He said, there will always be a cry in the human soul and a thirst that exists that can only be quenched by the divine. And the church is a broker for the divine. And as long as we are doing that and faithful to that, no matter what happens technology-wise, people will always come running to the church to get what cannot be duplicated or created by any other type of technology.
That's so good. And it's an opportunity for us.
Yes.
To be creative.
Yes.
Wow, that's exciting.
Leverage it.
I just want to encourage leaders as you're listening to this to not be scared, like Pastor Dharius is saying. Don't engage, get creative, don't get hung up on the way.
Yeah.
But get behind the what and get out there making an impact in the culture today, because people are quitting church, people aren't coming to church, and now we get an opportunity to be the church Jesus Christ called us to be.
Absolutely.
So, man, you got me excited. I know people listening are going to be excited to go out and start thinking through how we can continue to be creative in reaching a generation for Jesus Christ. So thank you for being here with us, man. It's been awesome.
Blast. Thank you for having me.
All the way from the East Coast.
Come on.
So, man, we're so super pumped to have you here. Jersey in the house. Thank you for joining us on the Leadership Roundtable.
Go Eagles.
No. This is Cowboy Country. Cowboy Country.
Go Eagles.
We're not having that here. You can edit that out, right? But no, thank you so much. We're grateful that you joined us today. And please go check us out. Leave us a review. Subscribe. Help us get the word out about this podcast, because our goal is to provide resources and have conversations that impact and make a difference in your church and in your business and in the organization you work in. Our goal is to help you and provide the best we can as you push forward the cause of Jesus Christ. Thank you so much. We look forward to seeing you on the next episode.